I'll be the first person to say that I'm not necessarily the best at video production, but I think this video requires a little bit of context. I have a credit card, and that credit card requires me to log all of my purchases. However, these external apps that offer to do it for me require subscriptions, or even for me to pay for the app, or it's not optimized for credit cards. There's really nothing out there for me. And so I thought to myself, I said, you know what? What if I had the ability to kill two birds with one stone? And that's what this video is. Bird A that I'm killing with the stone is making this app, and the second bird that I'm also killing with this stone, I know I've taken this idiom a little far, but forgive me, is to really just thwart Apple and to say, hey, you know what, Apple? I know that you don't want me making iPhone apps without a Mac, but you know what? I don't care. Let me explain. Do you know what the bane of my existence is? The fact that Apple products don't let their developers develop for their platforms unless you own a Mac. Like, hello? What? Anyway, what they do offer their developers is this thing called appleshortcuts. It's pretty interesting. It's a visual programming app. It's designed for when I get home, turn on my lights, simple stuff like that. But today, I decided to take it a step further. There's no way for us to access databases and generate PDFs on it, but what we can do is it has this fantastic tool called get contents of URL. And what that allows us to do is actually fetch using get requests, post requests, all the different types of URL requests, all the requests, to an external URL. And if we could develop a server on that URL, we could basically offload all of the fancy schmancy stuff. So right here, this first part of this project, making this credit card app, is we needed to make a client-side application. So all this, required was a simple shortcut that turned out to be not that simple, that had three main components. The first was to be able to add a new entry. The second was to be able to undo the previous entry. And the last was to generate a view, a reconciliation sheet for your credit card purchases. It took a little bit longer than expected, and by a little bit longer, I mean about 2 hours of just fiddling around with this gosh-forsaken app, and my phone got really, really hot. You can see here what I ended up doing actually was making this no pic sent icon that I had to actually upload to Imgur, because one of the things that I wanted to do was to be able to have a option to take a photo and then attach that photo to the entry in the server. So I finally was able to get things working. I decided to also implement a location feature, so that way when you actually created an entry, it would also take a snapshot of wherever your location was. Yeah, more on that in a minute. It was fun learning about all the little ins and outs of this little application, but it definitely got glitchy as it moved on. In addition to that, there was really no way for me to debug anything while I was working on it. It was kind of just to close my eyes and just cross my fingers that it works. Which is generally less than ideal. Like right here, I'll show you an example of how this was working where I was at. We clicked new, it ran, we asked for an amount, we plugged in 0, and then we could choose, no, I'm fine for the image, and then watch how long this would take. Getting location. And then, little me was like, oh, I can just say get name from location and it'll pull the name. Well, it was a little bit more complicated than that. And by a little more complicated, I mean it just said location. Less than ideal. Yeah, so we had to go back to square one. I actually had to make a new mini shortcut whose sole purpose in life was to debug what on earth these little features were doing. I used everything from content maps to quick views every other frame to just be able to actually extract some sort of information as to what the good heckins I was doing. But after a while, you can see the minutes ticking by on that little timer up at the top of my phone there. I was finally able to make something relatively useful. The other thing too is that I messed up and developed it literally top down instead of bottom up, and whenever you added a new action, it started at the bottom, which means I had to 3D touch and drag it all the way to the top. But eventually, we got there in the end. And just like that, it finished up. So we decided to use these technologies right here, boom, to actually make our server. We're using Node.js as the general framework with Pug, Express, and mongoDB as our backend server because SQL is just too complicated, to be totally honest with you. So we started off just making a basic npm project, nothing too exciting. All we needed to do was just install our dependencies and then get cracking on a basic server. The second thing we were going to do is make sure that we had the Pug templating. The reason I used Pug templating instead of just strict HTML is for two reasons. One, it looks prettier, it's more colorful, but but the reason I should tell people on why I used it is because it allowed us to dynamically generate web pages very simply, especially something that's going to be helpful for when we're trying to generate a page for all of our transactions. So we had just a basic website going here. I decided to put a landing page just at the slash, just so that way if anybody went to it, it wouldn't throw an error. You know, it's kind of little thing that just gets to me. So I set up a method for print, and then I also decided to start implementing our Mongo, all of our Mongo functionalities on the Mongo database. Completely in a new file. So I used Postman here to try to get a general idea of what the data was going to look like. So I used curl to send a couple of requests, and same thing with Postman to use a post request. And once I was able to extrapolate the information that was coming through the request, I set up, as you can see here, a MongoDB cluster just in Atlas, just to allow us to, put all that information into something that's, not on my laptop, especially considering this wasn't going to be hosted on my laptop. Anyway, I did a .env file here. No, you can't look at it. Don't look at it. Don't pause the video. I dare you to try. We threw all that into a .env, configured our .env. So that was all fun and fresh. I decided to really go full force on the async. It was a little tricky, I'm not gonna lie, just because I'm not particularly one for asynchronous functionality. I started programming with C#, which although it does have asynchronous functionality, I've never been formally taught on it. But I got there in the end. All we really needed to do at this point was to generate a page so that when you went to /page or print, it would show and visualize all of the entries in the database. So our database needed to be able to have a new entry, a delete entry, and a get all entries. The good news with this, that means we didn't have to do any querying. So you can see here, I decided to finally just get cracking on it. And eventually I was able to implement Bulma.io as a CSS framework to make it not look super hideous. And Bulma is a fantastic CSS framework. You can see how beautiful it makes it, and literally it took me probably 5 minutes to implement, and all of a sudden it just looked 2 trillion times better. The second thing that we really wanted to do was the fact that now we have something that's kind of starting to work, but we have nowhere to deploy it because, we can't just deploy it on our laptop because we need to be, we don't want to open up port forwarding. So I decided to use Firebase, just because the .web.app was shorter than herokuapp.com. And, I had some good use with Firebase in the past, so I decided to just create a simple Firebase app, which is what you're seeing here. I had to do some code refactoring to get everything to work, but eventually I was able to get the function deployed. However, I was encountering some issues, and those issues being that I couldn't actually use the app. Like, it was hosted, but I couldn't access it. I kid you not, I spent over an hour debugging this, trying to figure out what the heck was wrong. I figured it was something wrong in my .firebase file, but nothing was turning up. Nothing was fixed. I was on Stack Overflow. I was on their documentation. I couldn't figure it out. I even made a test HTML file just to get it to work. And then all of a sudden, I actually decided to look at the errors of what on earth was going on in my function. And we can see here, it's so stupid. It was so stupid. Do you know what it was? There it is. There it is right there. And I didn't even see it. I go to click away like this and boom. Look at this. The external network cannot be accessed because Google is a bunch of greedy jerks. Oh my gosh. Anyway, so I decided to use Heroku, but I was going to get back to that in a minute. The next thing that I really wanted to do was start on this undo functionality. But before I did that, I really wanted to use Firebase, particularly because I'm lazy and I'd already gone through the code refactoring to get it to work. So I tried to reorder the way I wish my app actually connected to Heroku, to Mongo, but it just was not working. I decided to try to go back to Postman and try to figure something else out, but it just was not working. So eventually I said, you know what, we're done. And I decided to finally port over to Heroku. In the meantime, however, while I was trying to get my mind mentally set for that, I decided to go back and actually work on the image implementation, because currently we didn't have any images. So I'd used this beautiful picture of a cat, and then I also added timestamp generation on the preview, so that way when you would pull and generate it, it would actually pull the timestamp as well. I built a little regex right here, and so that way I was able to actually convert the time into something that didn't look like a bunch of computer nonsense. And then after that, it was time to configure the Heroku app. So it was really quite simple, way easier than Firebase. Just a couple commands and it was up and running. The biggest reason I don't like Heroku is because every time you want to deploy, every single time, it's based on GitHub and Git. So we had to actually update in our shortcut app. But fortunately, that was pretty easy because it was just a simple fix, because I had everything dynamically updated through variables. So update one variable and everything's updating. That's the power of variables, kids. But yeah, with Firebase, it's just one command and it automatically updates everything. It's a couple more commands with Heroku, which is really lazy, I know. But it's fine. So then we also had to update the fact that we're using base64 data instead of a link. So that way our images aren't being uploaded every time. They're just being converted into base64. And that way it's being thrown in. A couple more, homekeeping things we had to do. We also had to reverse the data because it wasn't, I wanted to make it by date. So that way it went from oldest to newest, but it was going from newest to oldest, which is not what I was looking for. And then I decided to work on the undo functionality. It was actually quite a simple thing to do. All we had to do is just get all of the entries, take the oldest one, and get rid of it. It was pretty straightforward. The one thing we hadn't worked out, though, is how do we actually remove all of these entries? And I decided to add a URL parameter that you could call on the /print method. And what that would allow you to do is it would be a master copy, and that master copy would generate and then it would delete all the entries from the database. And then in the app, you could actually choose to have a preview or a master, which was the destructive one. So that way when you went to query it, it was working. You can see right there, the master and the destructive preview. And that was it. That was pretty much the whole app. You can see here, it gave us lots of confirmation. You can choose to make a new one, throw in a number here. Let's just do whatever. You can click no, I'm busy. And when we click no, I'm busy, it would pull that Imgur link, and then it would actually download it, and then it would convert into base64 for us, which was pretty cool. So then we could print, and we chose preview here instead of the master, which was the destructive one, and boom, it would generate that PDF. And the way that works is because all the PDF generation is doing in shortcuts, because again, Apple is a jerk and hates its developers and doesn't let us Windows users actually access it. All it's doing is it's just taking that HTML and converting it into a PDF. And so if we can generate that HTML as a pretty PDF, we can convert it into a beautiful PDF as well. I also had notifications that allowed us to view what was going on. You can see here, it would generate a fantastic looking PDF. I'm really happy with how it turned out. We could choose if we still wanted to print, and we could add as many options as we wanted. Here's what I'm adding for 300. No, I'm busy. Throw it in, and then I'm going to choose to undo. And then it told us which one we undid. And then you saw there was two that popped up there. Now when I print and I go to the master again, sorry, I did preview that last time. Now when I did master this time. And then I tried it one more time and I went and I did the preview, and this time they were all gone because it appended that extra variable, that extra URL feature, and that was it. So what's the moral of the story, ladies and gentlemen? There's two big takeaways from this. The first is that if you have an ability to overcomplicate something, do it. Absolutely. The second is that, come on, Apple. Come on. I don't want to buy a MacBook. Don't make me do it.